Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by again. The last couple of weeks I've been visited by a not very good friend, a virus. One of those things that doesn't stop you from working but leaves you exhausted and with headaches and the whole 9 yards. I got a little tired of doing that, but I had work that had to be done. It got done. But it really meant that when later in the day when I would sit down to do a video, I just did not have the energy to do a decent job at all. So that is now on the way out. Finally, these things do drag on from time to time, but that's just the way it is. And I'm back, and that's fine. I just want to do a little updating here on three subjects and leave it at that for today. One of them, I think they're all important. I try to stay away from too many of the trees, the little single individual things that happen in the country from time to time, but focus on the forest and on the major things that are happening in the forest, so to speak, that will influence the future, not just for the citizens of Panama, but for all of us who are residents and those who come to visit. It's been a difficult time throughout our region. As you know, here in Panama, or at least as I've mentioned in past videos, immediately after the election was over and the new administration was inaugurated, it was found that a less than transparent job had been done with the funding, and it's really incredibly unfortunate. I think everyone began to have feelings that something wasn't quite right near the end, but only when the full audit was done was it discovered that there really was. A lot of the expenses had been pushed into the latter part of this year, so they would not show up before the election. And then we found quite a bit of money that had been that was owed to people for services and products here in the country that they simply not gotten around to paying, and some of those for quite a long time. Now, I've seen that sort of activity in other nations in the past, in the days of the developing world. There is no excuse for that now in Panama. And it was really very upsetting to everybody. But as I pointed out in past, too, the country's leadership immediately came together. The different parties, they sat down, they got everything worked out, they approached exactly how they were going to proceed with things, and went directly up to New York, where the banks are, who have to be concerned about whether we pay our debts back and where the debt credit agencies determine our credit rating and everything else. I mean, this is serious business. You don't screw around with these people. This is the way it is in the real world. And they sat down, explained exactly what they were doing. We came through it brilliantly, and they took care of it. They just simply took ownership for it. They said, okay, the arguments and the unpleasantness about who's responsible for what, that will go on. That was a democracy. It's not certainly going to be buried. It will be discussed, but it was not allowed to get in the way of getting the job taken care of. And one of the things they did, is, as I mentioned before, is they found what seems like a very substantial amount of money, and it is $1.6 billion that needed to be paid against various and sundry obligations, and also within that a considerable amount of money that was owed. And so that money was not immediately available. And we have very strict regulations in the laws here about how much debt the country can get itself into. And that can be lifted, and it's very controversial when it happens as a rule. But in this case, it became very obvious. We had to get the money, pay everything off, get it out of the way, and get on with our lives, and that's precisely what happened. Now, so we took on much more debt down here than anyone had ever hoped, ever thought about doing. And yet, at the same time, the total amount of debt here is still very low, way lower than it is almost all countries out there represented by folks like yourselves. Yeah, definitely. So ours, our debt level will be higher than it should be according to the regulation with the law that is passed for financial responsibility law, and it will have to be changed, and National Assembly will have to agree to it, and they will, and it will happen, and there'll be a lot of complaining and griping. But the important thing is it gets done. Now, the one thing I didn't mention in the past I really do like about this is that we need to get this economy going again. As you know, things have been slowing down, and very definitely there's a whole host of reasons for it. I'm not going to beat the subject up tonight and just say that, yes, all right, we know that. Now, what many governments will do, and traditionally, is just print a whole pile of money, which is inflationary, which means the money itself becomes worthless after a while. But anyhow, they just print it and just dump it out there. We use the U.S. dollar. We cannot print the dollar. That cannot happen. As I often point out, Panama has to earn every single dollar that it spends. Even if it borrows it, has to earn it in order to pay it back, plus the interest. So we earn every single dollar in the country, and that is the currency we use every single day. That's what all the bank accounts are in, dollars and so forth. We have the Balboa, but that's just really coins, and it's not worth wasting time talking about. So with this set of circumstances, we're a little bit different than are most countries in the area. We can't, therefore, just print money and throw it out there. Another way that it's done is to have a huge debt that we take on, as we just took on, and then just spend that on everything all over the place to stimulate the economy and really to give people the feeling somehow that everything is okay, when in fact it isn't. So what's being done instead of that is that we borrowed $2 billion on the market. We got it at very low interest rates, as if nothing had happened. I mean, people were very impressed with the way we were dealing with things, all right? Very open, very open. Everybody knows exactly what's going on. And they borrowed that money. They're paying off the $1.6 billion, and then the remainder is what is needed to keep the budget going for the remainder of this year. That's not bad. And in other words, the money that is being spent here over the next few months much of it is owed to people. This is the money that's being used to stimulate the economy, or hope to. This is the whole purpose of it, is to get the economy moving. Instead of just borrowing money and just handing it out in new activities or new expenditures, they're paying people that they owe money, that their prior government owed for services rendered. This had been paid ages ago. Now they're getting paid. And that money, hundreds of millions of dollars, are going into the economy. And that will help stimulate activity, business activity, without creating new debt. We're paying off debts. And we're using the money to pay off debts in order to stimulate the economy, because so much of that money is spent to people here in Panama. That takes maybe a moment or two to get a grip on, but it's a very different way of dealing with our problems. And it may not be enough, and we may have to do something else or whatever, but that plus the fact that we have an austerity budget for next year, people aren't terribly happy about that, but the discussions go on, and everyone's aware of what's going on. And we have no outbreaks of hysteria or anything else. Meantime, around us, we have all sorts of problems going on. Venezuela it continues to just, I don't know, it's hard to say what it's doing. Deteriorating seems like such a mild word, but it's going right down the tubes just as it has been for so many years now. It's so sad, but such it is. Nicaragua, which is we consider like a mini Venezuela because it's very similar, but unfortunately for Nicaragua, they're too small for anybody to care. So the result is that the situation doesn't improve there, and it's just ignored by most countries. It's too small. I mean, that's not a good thing. It's not appropriate in many ways, but it's the way the world works. Costa Rica continues to face some severe financial problems, and they are paying a lot more to borrow money than we have to, and it's tough, and they have a number of political divisions that make it even tougher. Colombia, so much, the cartels that had finally been slowing down in their activity and things had improved substantially in that area. It's still better than it was, but some of the cartel leadership is going back out again and beginning its military operations. They're getting support from Venezuela and allowed to set up their bases across the border in Venezuela. Further complicating the situation is the fact that what they still say it's 1.4 million Venezuelan refugees in Colombia, but they've been saying that for several months. At the same time as they're saying that 5,000 cross over by foot from Venezuela every week. Meaning we're closer to 2 million, and everybody knows that. Nobody even wants to talk about numbers anymore. Colombia is just swamped with Venezuelan refugees, and that further complicates an already difficult picture with the cartel activity. Now, much of that Venezuelan refugees, many of them were moving further. I mean, they've walked hundreds and sometimes a couple thousand miles in this process. Down in Ecuador, Ecuador is, like Nicaragua, was one of the countries that was sold to a lot of North American retirees as a great place to live because it's very cheap and it's a beautiful country and so forth, all of which is true. But in both cases, the political situations have always been very dicey. And in Ecuador, a government, I think, is really making a serious effort to get things pulled together, from what I can tell from outside, is under terrific attack, basically because they're trying to raise the price of gasoline to at least cover its cost. It was one of these massive subsidy programs. And let's be frank, a lot of expatriates, one of the things they were pleased about when they moved to Ecuador was how cheap the gasoline was. But that couldn't last forever, and it didn't. It hasn't. And the government has raised it, and it is sticking by it. I don't know. By the time you see this, the thing may have come to some dramatic conclusion. I just hope that whatever it is, it's not too terrible. I have some photographs here. When I see them, I've been in Ecuador. I have a friend from Ecuador. I see things like this, and I just think, my God, it's terrible. But it's not the only place. You can see those in Venezuela. You can see them in Nicaragua. And in Peru, which is the next step where refugees go, the president and the Congress are in a real struggle here. And, well, let's just say that there's a terrific confusion, and they're still trying to figure out who's in charge. Apparently the president is, and the military is supporting him. Folks, this is Latin America at its worst. This is when things really start screwing up and falling apart. In the middle of it is this little island of calm. It's called Panama. We don't have anybody here to tell us what to do. I mean, Panamanians do what they think is the right thing to do. And they think the right thing to do is to stick together as a people and to be one. And they are. And their reaction to the shock of realizing they had this big debt that they were going to have to take care of, and the reaction of all our neighbors to all sorts of other problems that we don't face, it just makes it very, very obvious. I think the other nations here, I've worked in Peru, been through Bolivia, I've worked in Bolivia, I've also been through Ecuador and so on, and Nicaragua and Guatemala and a number of other countries in this region. And I really do think very highly of the people in all of these nations. There's some absolutely wonderful people and some spectacular views and natural wonders in all of these places. But their governments are not beautiful natural wonders. And ours is human, and it's not perfect, but we do look really, really good in comparison. And everything is relative in the business. And I think that right now, I don't think there's another nation in Latin America that is as stable and secure and passing through a difficult period as quietly and as organized and intelligent a fashion as Panama is. And that they look a lot better than a lot of countries in North America and Europe, and Asia. So much for that. But this is going on. This is a good news, so to speak, and it is good news. We're going to move on from here. Beyond that, the economy itself, which has been flat or worse, is seeing a little sign here and there of some recovery, but we can't expect anything too immediate. The government's just been in place. The payment of bills and things of this sort is underway. A lot has to happen. But the World Bank says we'll have 4.5% growth this year, and none of us believe it. Unlike most countries, Panamanians tend to be conservative in this regard, so we'll be very happy if we reach 3.5%, which is going to be way ahead of everybody else in the area, even though for us it's a low rate. I just wanted to show again that sense. Yet, it means to you is that the prices of real estate, both from the renting and buying viewpoints, are still very much depressed, very much. And it's a good time to buy, a good time to rent here in Panama, and it will continue to be that way until things do change. I expect them to, and they will. I mean, I have no doubt that in the longer run, I don't think it's a matter of years. I do think it's a matter of months. We have to see how next year, as we get through the end of this year and into early next year, we just have to watch how it all develops. No need to think that it's going to suddenly go screaming up. People who come here to buy thinking they're going to flip homes in 6 months, this is not how it operates. Okay? But if you're here to stay, you're going to be here for a while, you're going to be marketing properties to some other part of the world, and you have an operation set up to do that, and over time, this is an ideal time, either to buy your own home or to rent a place, or to buy for the purposes of selling to others, or even renting them out. So that's good. That remains good for those coming in, terrible for those here who would like to sell. The situation is particularly bad along the coast to the west of the city. The last video I have up just prior to this one, as you know, it's called Rising Sea Levels, without any reference to politics. I don't care about those, or science. This is not the question. We look at sea or coastal properties from an investment perspective, and it doesn't look good. And we take California, we take a look at California and see how things are happening there. And it's not talking about what could happen in the future, but what's happening right now up north on the Pacific side. It's important to look at the ocean that we are most concerned with here, which is the Pacific. And what we see is not particularly good. And I just want to say that in that last one, I used links to send people to the Los Angeles Times very excellent report done on the situation in half a dozen communities in California, how they're struggling to deal with the situation at their beaches. And they had not only done it in English, they'd done the whole thing in Spanish as well. So we had both versions, which I think is really wonderful. And I gave links to both of them I had received, only to discover later, much to my surprise, that the links were time dated. In other words, after a while, that link no longer took you to the articles. Instead, you had to subscribe to the Times in order to continue. I was only made aware of this a few days ago. Now at that video, and I will put them down here below, if you tried to get into the LA Times articles, and really they are very, very interesting to read, fascinating just in themselves, then you will find links to them. I'm the one who brought up the subject, and then I'm embarrassed to see the links don't work anymore. So with my apologies to the Times, as a courtesy to people here, I've just taken the text and made a simple PDF out of it in both English and in Spanish for those of you who prefer it. And you will find it down in the description below this video, as well as in the description of the other longer video that goes into this subject in more detail. So that's quite a bit. That's enough right now, as far as I'm concerned. I'm here. I hope I'm sounding pretty alive and active. I feel a lot better this evening than I did 24 hours ago, or certainly 2 weeks ago. So thank you very much for your patience. I look forward to seeing you again, and we'll talk about some new topics. And I think that'll be fun, and maybe talk to someone who lives here. See you then. Just a quick final note. I did the video last night, and this morning when I got up to complete the editing online and upload it to YouTube, I discovered there's a couple points there at the end where you get a black screen. You missed a few words, nothing of any significance at all. Sorry about that, and I have no idea why that occurred, but I just thought I'd let you know that you don't have to write about it. I'm aware of it. It just didn't seem logical to redo everything in order to deal with what was really a very minor, although irritating, inconvenience. So in any event, thank you for putting up with that. And again, if you're interested in hearing more of these videos, and feel free to subscribe. Just hit the button and ring the bell beside it, and you get immediate notification, or at least rapid notification, of new videos as they come out. That's what they're here for you. So thanks again, and again, my apologies for the little blip in this last video.